today we are transforming this old abandoned fireplace into a Harry Potter Floo powder network just like in the movies. Now this sounded deceptively simple at first, but here's the thing. What I didn't realize was that this project would turn my whole house into a construction site and be one of my most physically and emotionally draining projects that I've ever done in this room. You first need an old fireplace. I personally got mine from Facebook Marketplace, and I honestly just looked for the cheapest thing that I could find, but I also didn't want to put too much work into it to get it to where I needed it to be, which for me happened to be around the $75 range. Once I had it home, I scrapped what I didn't need or was too damaged to keep. Things like the backdrop of the bricks was completely scrapped because I had a plan to put green emerald tiles to give it that Ministry of Magic feel that this fireplace needed. Step number 1 done. Move this whole fireplace outside. Brought this little baby freaking table that kids play with. It's actually really awesome. I actually really love it. Yeah, these 2 plywoods are going to be replacing this thing. This thing is horrendous. But as you can see, they just have screws, which is pretty simple. You can see some bent right there. I then needed materials, so I went to my local Home Depot and picked up some tools and materials. I picked up some black paint, a tile cutter, more on that later in the video, some plywood. I actually needed 2 sets of plywood because of how wide the fireplace was for the next backdrop of this new fireplace, since I threw the old brick one out. This is an important one. Tile adhesive for the tiles to stick on the plywood. Simple grout, preferably white, especially for this particular project. A grout spreader or grout float to spread your grout around the tiles. A sponge and some knee pads just for comfort. Now the knee pads you don't really need if you are working on top of a surface, but I personally had to work on the floor, so I needed to be on my knees, and yeah, highly recommend knee pads for the comfort. Now for the black paint, I got more of a matte black finish than I did a glossy one, just because of my preference. You guys can do whatever you guys want. For the tile cutter, I got a small tile cutter, but unfortunately it wasn't cutting clean cuts on the tiles, and that was actually damaging some of the tiles. So I ended up returning it and actually renting a wet tile saw from Home Depot. Highly do not recommend renting one out. I got probably the worst experience with renting anything, honestly. A wet tile saw. I've tried renting some other things. I just wouldn't recommend renting at all in Home Depot, and that's just my personal experience. So I'm now a proud owner of a wet tile saw for any future DIYs that I would like to do in my house. Now for the 2 sets of plywood, just measure what your fireplace needs and cut it to size. I had to get 2 plywoods and glue them together with industrial wood glue, and honestly it's been holding up for 2 years straight now without a single issue. So if you want to go down that route, I am telling you that it works. Now the tile adhesives that I bought have been amazing so far, and they've also lasted 2 years without a single issue. No tile has ever fallen off, and I've moved this fireplace, which is actually right behind me, probably like 15 to 20 times throughout its lifetime, and I haven't had a single issue with anything really falling off. Now once you're done placing the tile adhesives down on the plywood, the fun part begins. Putting down the tiles. I personally got, like I said, green emerald tiles, and here are the tiles. Regular tiles, but I really think, because it changes with the lighting, so if it gets darker, I think with white grout, which I got, it's going to look beautiful. I think so. We'll see how that goes. I'm excited nonetheless. But yeah, here we go. You can get whichever color you guys want. I of course wanted to go down that Ministry of Magic vibe or feel, and I used a wet tile saw to cut them perfect to size, especially for all the corners that the tile would just overlap. I also spaced each tile apart with spacers for the grout after the tiles were stuck together to the adhesives how I wanted. Once the tiles were stuck on and I knew they wouldn't come off the plywood, I began laying down the white grout and packed it into the crevices in between each tile. During this process, I would highly recommend knee pads unless you're doing the grout on top of a table, which in my circumstances, I wasn't. Once the tiles were stuck on the plywood and I knew they wouldn't come off, I began laying down the white grout all around the crevices in between each tile. Once all the grout is placed where you want it, now comes the cleanup. You have to get a sponge and some water. I personally got a bucket with water and just used the same sponge in and out of the bucket, and just basically did this rotation in circle, like wax on, wax off. So you definitely want to go ahead and do that because you don't want to take the grout off of the crevices that you literally just put in. So I rather just lightly, don't put too much pressure on, just lightly go in circles and you'll be perfectly fine and you'll be okay. Just make sure you're doing it lightly and you're not squeezing it or just making the tiles just drenched in water. Just lightly go into a circle rotation pattern and you should be good to go. The tiles will be clean and you wouldn't have taken any grout out of the crevices that you just poured in. After it's all nice and clean, you should have somewhat the final product of your fireplace backdrop, and the only thing left for you to do is install it onto the fireplace itself. Now of course this is my way of doing this, and I'm sure there are way better ways to do it outside, but this is what worked for me. And if you guys want your fireplace to look like my final product, I would definitely go ahead and save this, because my fireplace has been up and running for 2 years and we haven't had a single issue with it. I haven't had any tiles fall off because of the adhesives. I haven't had any of the grout come off because I didn't pour it in correctly. Everything has been perfectly fine. So voila, you now have your very own Harry Potter Flute Network fireplace. I hope this transformation has sparked some inspiration towards you and your own projects. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more Wizarding World DIYs. Also let me know down in the comments what's the next project you guys would like me to work on. Now if you excuse me, I think it's time for another Diagon Alley trip, or just maybe the kitchen for a snack. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one.